everyone. I'm going to begin. We're going to look at Beowulf, getting into the plot and in particular the three encounters with the three manifestations of evil in the poem. I mentioned to you last time that although this is an epic, that we need to see it not in the tradition of the Greco-Roman epic so much as epic themes, but now in roughly Christian terms, because we see a battle, strictly speaking, between good and evil, rather than different sides in a conflict between kings or empires, which we saw in the Greek epic and the Roman epic. Now it's become more of a religious epic, in the sense that it deals with things that we call good and evil. That's clearly the terms of engagement here, and we don't see what we would have seen in the time of the Beowulf epic, battles between nations or kingdoms, although they're there. And the conclusion of Beowulf with the hero's death leaves his kingdom defenseless in the face of the other nations. That's one of the evils of having the king die, is that it doesn't appear obvious how his kingdom is going to defend itself after the three manifestations of evil have been defeated. All the same, because he's fighting against evil, the significance of the epic transcends just the account that's been told here to be more generally applicable, because we still face good and evil. And I will say to you that Tolkien was schooled in his portrait in The Lord of the Rings by the account of Beowulf, because just as when the dragon is killed in Beowulf and evil lingers on, likewise in The Lord of the Rings, when the Ring of Power is destroyed in Mount Doom, if you've read The Lord of the Rings or watched it, evil lingers on, which you wouldn't know if you only watched the movie. Because in the movie, it's sort of they all lived happily ever after, and there's the king, and there's the bride, and there's the city, and there's a lot of cheering, and it's sort of like Star Wars all over again. You know, black and white, and evil's defeated by good, and that's the end of the story. But it's not the end of the story in Beowulf, and it's not the end of the story in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, unlike the Hollywood version. Evil lingers on, it remains a human problem, and it's the problem that lies behind wars between nations, but it's focusing on an ethical problem, which the Beowulf poet, just like I am going to say, is actually a theological problem. It's the problem of human sin, which has been announced really by the poet when he talks about Cain and Cain's descendant. This is not dealing with just a figure that is hostile to the civilized world. It seems of bigger significance by invoking Cain and his offspring, and among those offspring all sorts of various monsters. The poet is bringing us into a realm that considers more than earthly conflicts in the consideration, and so that makes it of interest. And it, as I say, it clearly demonstrates that the poet is Christian and wants us to see the epic in with spiritual lenses, if you will. Does that make sense? I mean, it's obviously a very different view than that of Virgil in his underworld, where he puts everybody down in the underworld, and then the good and the bad are separated there. There's the Elysian fields where the good character go, and then there's the Tartarus, where the giants are punished and where evildoers are tortured and so forth. But they're all still in the underworld. There's no real, there's some differentiation, but there's not a total differentiation in terms of the outcome. It's not black and white or good and evil. Everyone goes there. They all end up being shady, and the existence of this world, at least according to many of the figures there, is superior to that which comes after life. In the afterlife, the best you can hope for is to have a good reputation on earth. You're going to be famous. People will talk about you after you're gone, so you'll have immortality through a good name, which you'll be able to pass on, and people will remember you and they'll sing of you, and so that's your way of living on afterwards. But there's no life after death in the sense of a better place. The idea of a heavenly reward or a reward of damnation, that comes when the human history is looked at in an ethical fashion, and justice starts to become the primary consideration. Plato's already leaning in that direction, we saw. But yes, question or comment.
Called Beowulf an epic. Are you referring to it in only its epic themes, or are you placing it to some degree in the tradition of the Odyssey and the Iliad?
Yeah, so the very good question, because on the course in general, certainly this semester, but even beginning of next semester, where we'll kick off with Paradise Lost. When we say epic, we mean the Greco-Roman epic. So there's a tradition. It's a long narrative poem which has a hero, and it's encyclopedic, and it begins in the middle of things, in medias res, and it invokes the muses, and the hero goes down to the underworld and comes up from the underworld, and there's a sort of an epic journey. And the hero vanquishes his opponents in the end and is exalted in some way that makes him more than he was in his life. Those are characteristics of the Greek epic and the Roman epic, but they're not here. Not the same thing. So it doesn't follow the conventions of the Greco-Roman epic. But we still have a long narrative poem dealing with matters of, I would say, larger human significance because of the conflict with good and evil. And that's identified by the poet when he says that Grendel is one of the offspring of Cain, and therefore we know as a Christian audience, as a Christian poet, presuming his audience knows who these figures are. He mentions them and doesn't. He explains a little bit, actually. There's a little bit of an explanation, but is assuming that in his audience, and certainly saying that this is his viewpoint, this is why who he is and where he come from and why he acts the way he acts. And yet it's setting it in a pre-Christian world, because the pagans here, so we left off last time when Grendel had attacked Heorot, this golden hall of civilization, and eaten the people within, just savagely. It was unstoppable. And at the outcome of that, there's 12 years of basically terror, and there's no hero that emerges. They appeal to their pagan gods. They cry out to their pagan gods. That's what the poet says. And the poet, who doesn't believe in the pagan gods, is not seeing this as a sign of repentance on their part. I don't think it's necessarily so just because they believe in gods doesn't mean that they're turning in the right direction. They're just turning in another bad direction, because the pagan gods are not going to save them per se. So let me just read a little extract here. But in answer to your question, it is not an epic in terms of conventions. It is an epic in terms of being encyclopedic about the most important things, but it isn't really getting into every little detail of conduct the way we might expect in the Greco-Roman world. But there's some of that there. You know, how a lord treats his vassals, how kinsmen come to the aid of their fellow kin, of the fact that if you kill a man's relatives, there's a price to be paid. You have to pay vergild, you have to pay man money, you have to pay a bounty, effectively, even if it was a just killing. Somebody's lost a relative, and you have to compensate them for it. Right, so there's a recognition, interestingly, there of the value of human life. That's also embedded in the narrative, where you don't get that in the pagan world. You kill somebody, and you can take his relatives as your slaves, and you do. You don't pay them compensation for their murdered relatives in battle, but here you do. So there's a sense of the value of human life also. I mean, it's not a dominant theme, but it's there. a recognition of this. And remember, this is Germanic culture. We're not dealing with Greco-Roman anymore. We're talking about Norse culture, Germanic culture, Northern culture. It's very different. And different sorts of virtues are represented here. Wisdom is one of them, actually. And it's represented by the king Hrothgar. Very wise king. But what he seems to have in wisdom, he lacks in courage. He's unwilling to go out and hunt down Hrothgar. He sits there and wants to protect what he has. And even there, and this is why I think the poem's quite effective, he has a very good reason for this. It's not just because he's afraid. It's more that if I go out and die, what happens to my people? Who's going to look after them? He has to think about more than his own life. He has to think about his duty in maintaining the community, preserving it from other enemies, other nations and so forth. So he's aware of the consequences of going out in battle and losing, not just for himself, for his whole country. We're going to see, and it's a good thing to do, compare Hrothgar to Beowulf, because Hrothgar lacks courage. Beowulf has courage in spades. He is courage. He represents courage. This is courage personified. And he comes to his aid. And he's a young man. You can imagine him. He's able to swim across vast distances, superhuman feats. By the way, the name Beowulf, Beo might be a bear. So he's a bear-like man. He's huge, powerful, does superhuman things. He fights against sea monsters while he's out there, wrestling him with his bare hands. So he's just this massive physical hero, but and so in a sense an Achilles-type figure. But also he seems virtuous, and that's not insignificant. It's not just a physical fight; it's a fight of virtue. And that may be obvious, since Cain represents evil, Beowulf represents good, but he is going to demonstrate what goodness means by his conduct towards the very things that Grendel hates, he loves. He loves his kindred. He loves the light. He loves the good. He's willing to put himself out and defend those things that he loves behind him. He's going to go out in front of them because he's moved by his love for what is good and just and right. And now he comes to the aid of his kindred, whom he's never met. But he's going to do it because it's the right thing to do. So he's a just man, and he's portrayed as a very good man. Not just strong, but good. And that's essential in this as well, is the goodness of that. And it's a clear portrait here. Again, compare that to our fellow Aeneas in the Aeneid. Was Aeneas a good man? How was he portrayed in the Aeneid? I mean, you tell me. Sure. Yes, at the end of the day, he did his duty. He was dutiful, which is a good quality. But it's not an unambiguously good quality. And he contradicts his obedience through his other actions as well, right? So he's a very mixed character. He's hard to like. You know, he's not being portrayed as in an idealistic fashion. Here is a bit more of an idealistic fashion. A little bit of an unrealistic hero. You know, he's like Superman. Swims across the oceans and fights monsters with his bare hands and like superhuman strength. And really, to some degree, superhuman virtue. Whereas Aeneas, you know, what's with the Dido episode? You know, why is he bothering with Dido? He knows what he has to do. He wants to stay in Troy and die. He is encouraged not to do so, but he's a conflicted character, and his motives are mixed. And when Dido rebukes him in the underworld, we're actually somewhat sympathetic to Dido, right? I say to you again what I said at the time. We are not supposed to sympathize with Dido. Dido represents selfish passion, a devotion to selfish passion. And Aeneas represents the same thing when he falls in love with Dido. He's going to set aside what he knows what's right, what he ought to do, in favor of what he wants to do. And what he wants to do is to stay with Dido. But at the end of the day, and this is what makes him the Roman hero, he sets aside his own selfish desires for the greater good of Rome. That's what makes him a hero. But his character is conflicted, and we sense that. Now, that makes him more realistic, but it also makes him less admirable in one sense, right? Or does it? I mean, I'm just presenting this here. Are characters that we can't identify with better heroes?
Yes.
In what sense?
In the sense, well, for example, Jesus being the ultimate hero.
Yes.
He can relate to us.
Yes.
In his humanness.
Yes.
But we are less capable to relate to him due to his divinity. And he's the ultimate hero.
In his holiness, in his ability to, yes.
Yeah.
We have trouble identifying with somebody who will self-consciously, deliberately go to his own death for other people's sins. How do we identify with it? Because there's no justice in it in terms of towards the people. He doesn't owe them anything. The justice that's done is God's justice. He does it for the Father. The Father sends the Son goes obediently because the Father wills that the Son goes, but the people that he goes to die for don't deserve to be forgiven. There's nothing lovable in them that deserves that love, and that's why there's an inequality there in Jesus' love. It's undeserved love, and that's why that love is not like our love. So in a sense, you're right. The distinction you made is correct. We do identify it, we idealize it, but it's not a role model in the sense that we think we can fulfill that. We would like to. By God's grace, maybe we can, but it's going to be by God's grace and with his help, because that's not a human achievement. Nobody does this. He says that, a good man might possibly lay himself down for his friends, but here's the proof that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. There's the proof that he's not like us. While we were still sinners, then he did it, right? When we hated him, he loved us. Nobody does that. A good man might die for his friends like Beowulf does. He's a very good man, but he's not Christ, and his death has not got the same significance either. Yes, again?
Beowulf makes a few references to God's grace as well, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's relying on it entirely. Not entirely.
At points. Yeah. So, and he's a pagan character, right? So so Beowulf, the hero, is not Christian. The poet who writes about him is. But occasionally he gives him language that doesn't seem very realistic, given his time period. So it's almost like he's like Virgil. He has a light, which he himself doesn't see, the significance of the words that he gives us. Like there's a sense of a deeper significance that the character doesn't realize, but the audience is supposed to pick up. So there's a discrepant awareness between the character and the audience is supposed to see things a little differently. What I'm saying is this is a complex text then. And we don't like complex texts. And the reason I say that is because we like Marvel superhero movies, which are not complex texts. The hero is almost always the same, with superpowers. Some of them a little better, some of them a little bit worse than others, but they're just basically, they don't succeed because of their virtue or their goodness. They succeed because of their powers. That's not heroic. Jesus, it has the power of Almighty God, but he doesn't defeat sin through power. He defeats it through weakness and actually through goodness. He overcomes evil. So it's an ethical issue. Very important to see that point and recognize that the cross is not about power per se. It disarms the powers of the world, because the world understands everything by power. And the Marxists of our day think it's all about power. God sees it differently, sees it ethically, and encourages us to see it in the same way. This is a battle between good and evil. That's what life's about. It's not about what tribe you belong to. It's about where you stand in relation to the just king. Where do you stand? Right? Because that's where it cuts through. The pagans don't see that clearly, although Plato talks about justice. And in a sense, later writers think that he's talking about terms that they can appropriate for the Christian faith, rightly so, I think. At the same time, he does not worship the one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He does not worship that God. He does not worship the triune God, has no idea about God. Doesn't know the significance of loving your enemies. No Greek would ever do this. It would be unjust. Your enemies are trying to destroy you. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to act like Odysseus, spurred on by Athena, and you're going to shoot them all dead. Justice wants you to kill them all. Even Odysseus doesn't want to do it, and Athena says, do it. Kill them all. No sense of showing mercy, compassion to your enemies. It's just not there. And likewise, those who fall on the wrong side of the consequence of a loss in battle, you're going to be enslaved. That's it. Too bad. At best, you might be like Eumaeus the swineherd, a good man that serves a just king, but you have no control over your own life. You've lost your dignity. That's how it's portrayed. So, back to the text. But I wanted to emphasize that. So this epic is not like the other epics. In some sense, it is a superior epic, because now it deals with the issues that the Christian faith reveals to be the ultimate issues in life. It's not about power. It's not about wealth. It's not about sex. It's not about money. It's about right and wrong. It's about justice. It's about mercy, and above all, it's about love. And Beowulf demonstrates his love for his kindred by willing to put himself between them and the monsters that are trying to destroy the community he loves. Yes?
Isn't it about wealth a little bit, though?
Sure.
As an expression of virtue?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So in the Germanic culture, just like in the Greco-Roman culture, wealth and status, like as in, are you an aristocrat, are you is part of your excellence, your arete in Greek. It's part of your excellence. And you don't, but gold is something that you can demonstrate is the product of your virtue. That's why it's necessary Odysseus come back home with a lot of treasure, because he's not going to appear like a just man if he comes back empty-handed. He escapes back home he doesn't even have the shirt on his back. He's been stripped clean. He's got no clothes on him at all. And then the Phaeacians give him royal robes, as it were, and all sorts of wealth, more than he would have been able to bring back from Troy. They give him that. But then when he gets back to Ithaca, he doesn't come in and say, you see that? Look at me, I'm the hero. He comes back incognito, but that is important later because it's a testimony to his virtue. So they do recognize a connection between wealth and virtue. So, does that mean you go after the wealth? No. They also, in Greek tales, they'll demonstrate you don't go after the wealth, you go after what's right, and then you get wealth because of you do what's right. So it's very clear teaching in Greek stories. It's actually, for a hero to go after wealth and treasure is, it's not immoral, it's beneath human dignity to do it for that reason, which is why Agamemnon's condemned. Because he's really interested in power politics and in treasure and being the most rich and powerful of all. But the question is Agamemnon the most virtuous of the Greeks? And Achilles says, no way, man. That's me. That's me. I'm the best of the Greeks. and you took my girl, and you've dishonored me, and you have suggested that you're greater than I because you have the power to do it, and your might does not make right, and I'm not going to fight, and you can't win without me. And let's see who the better man is here. That's what it's about. And he's angry that the girl's been taken from him. Does he really care about the girl? I'm not sure. It's what it represents, the wrath of Achilles. But it's really about injustice done to him. Anyway. So Beowulf, when he departs from Denmark and comes down to rescue his kindred, he is going to come to the rescue of his brethren. The prince of the Shieldings, powerful counselor, the highest in the land. They would lend advice, plotting how best the bold defenders might resist and beat off sudden attacks. And what do they say? It's a bit like in Daniel, the counsels of Nebuchadnezzar. What should we do here? And they come and well, you should do this and do that. And it doesn't affect anything, just like the counselors of Pharaoh. We can't stop this. Sometimes at pagan shrines they vowed offerings to idols. Note that he calls them idols. This is Beowulf poet. Swore oaths that the killer of souls might come to their aid and save the people. So where's the irony here? They appeal to the killer of souls to save them from the killer of bodies. This is how perverse they are. So if you don't think the Beowulf poet is telling you what he thinks of the pagans, it's clear. They're appealing to a spiritual dark power to save them from a physical threat. And as a result, imperiling their souls in the process, not just their bodies. How deep is the irony? But they don't know any better. That was their way, he says. Their heathenish hope, deep in their hearts, they remembered hell. The Almighty Judge of good deeds and bad, the Lord God, head of the heavens and high King of the world, was unknown to them. O cursed is he who in time of trouble has to thrust his soul in the fire's embrace, forfeiting help. He has nowhere to turn. The poor pagans. But blessed is he who after death can approach the Lord and find friendship in the Father's embrace. Comment, he pities the poor heathens who don't know any better. So give them the gospel. Go tell them. They don't know any better. So that time, troubled time continued. Woe that never stopped. Steady affliction of half-Dane's son. Too hard an ordeal. There was panic after dark. People endured raids in the night, riven by the terror. Then they heard about Grendel. Hugelax's Thane was on home ground, ever at Yatland. There was no one else like him alive. In his day, he was the mightiest man on earth, high-born and powerful. He ordered a boat that would ply the waves. He announced his plan to sail the Swan's Road and search out that king. That's one of those kennings I talked about, the Swan's Road, the sea. And search out that king, the famous prince who needed defenders. Nobody tried to keep him from going. No elder denied him, dear as he was to them. Instead, they inspected omens and spurred his ambition to go, whilst he moved about like the leader he was, enlisting men the best he could find. With 14 others, the warrior boarded the boat as captain, a canny pilot among coasts and currents. So off he goes, the hero. They don't want him to go because the journey that he undertakes could mean the loss of their beloved mighty man. But they won't stop him because what can stop a man bent on doing the right thing? So off he goes. But they're pagans as well. And that includes him. So off they go. I'll skip over this. And he announces himself, Beowulf, and tells them why he's come. And I want you to just notice the response he gets. The leader of the troop unlocked his word hoard. A word hoard is a thesaurus is a treasure chest. That's what thesaurus means in Greek. The word hoard is his vocabulary. He's well spoken. He's not just strong, he's eloquent, speaks well, just like Achilles. And Odysseus, the distinguished one, delivered this answer: "We belong by birth to the Yat people and owe allegiance to Lord Hugelac. In his day my father was a famous man, a noble warrior lord named Ecgtheow. He outlasted many a long winter and went on his way. All over the world, men wise in council continue to remember him." Where is this? "We come in good faith to find your Lord and nation's shield, the son of Halfdane. Give us the right advice and direction. We have arrived here on a great errand to the Lord of the Danes, and I believe, therefore, there should be nothing hidden or withheld between us. So tell us if what we have heard is true about this threat, whatever it is, this danger abroad in the dark nights, this corpse maker mongering death in the shielding's country. I come to proffer my wholehearted help and counsel. I can show the wise Hrothgar a way to defeat his enemy and find respite, if any respite is to reach him ever. I can calm the turmoil and terror in his mind. Otherwise he must endure woes and live with grief for as long as his hall stands at the horizon on his high ground." Now, I just want you to notice one thing. He doesn't talk about defeating the monster. He talks about removing the terror. Now, if he defeats the monster, he will get rid of the terror, but it's more than that. He seems to represent hope in that utterance. He's going to, it's almost like he's addressing his mental health. By removing the physical threat, the spiritual threat will be dealt with as well. Because at the moment, he's not only afraid by day, he can't sleep by night. He's plagued with the thoughts all the time. They let him in. So they get through the sentries and onwards. And he again appeals to the Almighty Father. They arrive at Heorot. And then a proud warrior questioned the man concerning their origins. Now, what we're encountering here is two young, brave men. And what we have here is what you've probably seen when young men are sort of sizing each other up and thinking, I think I can take this guy. I'm not sure. Like he looks pretty strong, but we're going to see about that. And so they begin with a little bit of what in English, Old English is called flighting, which is smack talk. He's going to tear into him a bit and talk about his reputation and his fame and so forth. Now, this is the prelude. As you'll know from watching NHL fighting, this is the prelude to fist flying after it. It starts, though, with chirping. It starts with a little bit of that, and then it's going to come after that, but one follows the other. Men, when they get in fights, when they've had a few drinks, it starts with the swearing and the cussing and the whatever, and I'm going to do this to you, and oh yeah, you're going to, yeah. And terrifying their opponent. Yeah, you know, and I'm not going to stop either. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that to you. So you'll see this fighters in a ring. They'll be doing this, and what they're doing is they're getting inside their opponent's heads. And if you can beat them beforehand by words, then the fists will follow, and that will be the end of it. Because the first punch is going to hurt. But if you think that it's going to get worse for you, then you've already lost. So this is how it begins. A proud warrior questioned the men concerning their origins. Where do you come from, carrying these decorated shields and shirts of mail, these cheek-hinged helmets and javelins? I am Hrothgar's herald and officer. I've never seen so impressive or large an assembly of strangers. Stoutness of heart, bravery, not banishment, must have brought you to Hrothgar. So here's the positive report. This man sees them as good. So there's his response. He's not the only response, however. Beowulf says who he is and repeats what we already know. There are certain formalities because he reveals that he's a kinsman, so they treat him in kind. And Hrothgar is there, an old man among retainers, and a valiant follower stood foursquare in front of his king. He knew the courtesies. Wulfgar addressed his dear lord. Hrothgar recognizes who he is and says, okay, you're welcome here. This is a good ally come here. This is from my kinsman. Then Beowulf comes in and he boasts about himself. Now again, this is not Christian behavior. Locked out. This is not Christian behavior. He's going to go on about how famous he is and why he deserves to be revered for the great man that he is. And sort of characteristic of a young man. He's proud of how strong he is. So it's realistic in that sense. I said it's idealistic in the sense that it portrays a man who's almost superhuman in his strength, but it's realistic in the sense that it expresses a young man's vanity about his strength. And this will get a response from a retainer. So, I come to you here, King Hrothgar, because all knew of my awesome strength. Awesome. They had seen me bolstered in the blood of enemies when I battled and bound 5 beasts, raided a troll nest, and in the night sea slaughtered sea brutes. I have suffered extremes and avenged the yachts their enemies brought it upon themselves. I devastated them. Now I mean to match for Grendel. So he is. He's pumping up his own tires. He is full of himself. And, the old men sitting there are like, I remember when I was young. I remember when I was a bit full of myself, thought I could do this. Okay, yeah, sure. But he adds to it, whichever one death fells must deem it a just judgment by God. And I'm going to fight him hand to hand. Hand to hand is how it will be, a life and death fight with the fiend. Whichever one death fells must deem it a just judgment by God. Okay, so now he makes it about something more than strength. So at first he is just the pagan hero, a young man, proud of his physical strength. But now he recognizes that actually there's something greater at work here, and it's a battle between good and evil. And we're going to see who's going to win this. And because he sees himself to some degree as good, but ultimately he is going to attribute the outcome to God. And this is how the Germanic peoples and the Scandinavians would have seen conflict, by the way. And the Knights of the Round Table, which we're going to see next class when we talk about Sir Gawain the Green Knight, would also have seen it. The most virtuous knight or the most virtuous warrior is the one who wins the fight. It's whoever's the best. Not who's the strongest, but whoever is the best man. That is the man who wins the fight. Because God is good. Therefore, he rewards goodness. That's part of the chivalric code in the middle. That's why they do jousting. And this is why they honor the best knight. It's the most virtuous man. You're expected to have manners that fit everything else. So it's a total package. But there's a moral goodness that's expected there, not expected of Odysseus, not expected of Aeneas, but yes, expected of Christians. Why? You gave the reason. They model themselves after Christ. So there's the real hero. The hero is Christ. The lesser heroes seek to act like him. And in battle, God will reward them because they are virtuous just like Christ is. Now, what they neglect to note in all this is that God died for the ungodly. And they just simply see it as a physical fight. But anyway. But you see, they bring it down to a matter of justice. This is about justice. And I will win because there is a God who holds to justice. And they say this is unrealistic for the pagan age, I think. But it's put in there by the Beowulf poet. If Grendel wins, it will be a gruesome day. He will glut himself on the yachts and the war halls, swoop without fear on that flower of manhood as on others before. Then my face won't be there to be covered in death. He will carry me away as he goes to ground, gorged and bloodied. He will run gloating with my raw corpse and feed on it alone in a cruel frenzy, fouling his moor nest. No need then to lament for long or lay out my body. If the battle takes me, send back this breast webbing that Wieland fashioned and Hrethel gave me to Lord Hugelac. Fate goes ever as fate must. Now he appeals to fate. This is not a Christian concept. But he does appeal to the goodness of God that will determine the battle. And the justice. So he gives an account of this, and there's a feast, because everybody is struck by the wonderful speech that Beowulf gives and his willingness to go hand to hand in combat against the beast that's destroying everybody else. And now a young man at a feast has had a few too many drinks. His name's Unferth. I mentioned the young bucks come out, and they usually come out after they've had a few drinks, and here you go. From where he crouched at the king's feet. Now that's also telling. He crouched at the king's feet. Is he a heroic individual? He's a brave man? No, he's crouched at the king's feet. The king is afraid to go out and fight. Same with Unferth. He probably feels a little bit ashamed at the sheer bravado of Beowulf coming in and them just cowering in fear. So he wants to show him that he's a man too. So from where he crouched at the king's feet, Unferth, the son of Ecglaf, spoke contrary words. Beowulf's coming, his sea braving, made him sick with envy. He could not brook or abide the fact that anyone else alive under heaven might enjoy greater regard than he did. Are you the Beowulf who took on Breca in a swimming match on the open sea, risking the water just to prove that you could win? It was sheer vanity made you venture out on the main deep, and no matter who tried, friend or foe, to deflect the pair of you, neither would back down.